Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to a special Sunday edition of the Watchman Newscast live stream. What more can be said other than we just witnessed in the past 24 hours one of the most monumental events to take place in the Middle East, not only this century, but even stretching into the 20th century. I do not exaggerate when I say that the Assad regime, which ruled with an iron fist in Syria for over 50 years, which is one of Israel's most committed enemies, which was the key, the real crown jewel in Iran's ring of fire, is gone. That regime has now been toppled as Islamic jihadists have seized control in Damascus, in the capital of Syria, one of the world's oldest inhabited cities. Not only that, Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian dictator, the Iranian client, has fled, and he has received reportedly asylum in Russia. He is there as an exile with his family, with his wife and his children. So this is all really, hey folks, take a deep breath. I know I am. This is all really unfolded in the past 10 days. The day before Thanksgiving here in the States, November 27th roughly, is when this thing really exploded. When Israel and Hezbollah agreed to a ceasefire after Hezbollah had been thumped thoroughly. And that's one reason we saw so little resistance by the Assad regime in Syria. More on that in a minute. But the rebels roared out of these rebels, the Sunni jihadists, let's be a little more specific, with links to Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood and backed by the Islamist Erdogan regime in Turkey. That's a more accurate description. I know the New York Times and the mainstream media are trying to recast the jihadists now as moderate Jeffersonian style democracy-minded chaps, but that's not the case, and it's a real concern, and that's an understatement. Again, we'll break that down more, but they roar out of northwestern Syria after lying low to an extent for the past 4 years, and now you have history made, Middle Eastern history and world history made, folks. This is happening in real time. Do you think you're not living in Bible times, prophetic times? This is unfolding before your very eyes right now. And think about this. And we're going to break all this down. You need to understand the players. You need to understand the ramifications of what happened here and how it affects you going forward, no matter where you live. Look, we've got viewers from around the world here on the channel. And of course, in an immediate sense, this affects Israel. This is unfolding at Israel's northeastern doorstep, right along its border. And as I speak here on Sunday afternoon here in the United States, it's Sunday night in Israel, about 10 p.m. in Israel. Israel is carrying out airstrikes in Syria. Why? Because they're taking out advanced weapons stockpiles, factories, chemical weapons in Syria so that the jihadis can't get their hands on them. Very wise of Israel. Israel also creating a buffer zone along that border area between Israel and Syria. And they've also seized Mount Hermon. Now, Mount Hermon, a beautiful ski resort, by the way, on the Israeli side, but Mount Hermon stretches, it's in Israel, it's in Lebanon, also in Syria. Israel seized the Syrian side of the mountain. And the plot thickens. Israel wisely, again, look, Bibi was on the Golan today, staring into Syria. Israeli security chiefs are up there. They realize the ramifications of this, and Israel wants to ensure that whatever happens in Syria doesn't spill over into Israel, and they aren't threatened by these jihadis. We're going to break that down. But folks, think of this when we think about the Middle East. And it's interesting, my team and I, we say, well, what's going to happen next? Well, Donald Trump is coming back into office January 20th. Will peace break out in the Middle East? Abraham Accords, that's back on the table, obviously. Will Saudi Arabia come to the table with Israel? And yet, there's a good chance of that, by the way. And yet, you're not going to see true stability in the world's most chaotic, volatile, and insane region until Jesus returns, the Prince of Peace. And that's a fact. Think about the last 14 years. Okay, we're almost in 2025. December 2010, the so-called Arab Spring, which quickly devolved into an Islamist winter, that begins. So we've got the Arab Spring. We've got the Syrian civil war begins during that period in March 2011. We've got In Egypt, in the span of 3 years, Hosni Mubarak toppled, then the Muslim Brotherhood toppled. We had Tunisia, a regime change there. We had riots, uprisings throughout the region. Out of that emerges ISIS in 2013 and 2014. They establish a caliphate. They roar across Iraq and Syria. Then ISIS is crushed. And then we've got the rise of the Iranian axis like never before. We've got October 7th, and we've got in the past 14 months, culminating last night with the fall of Damascus and Assad, that Iranian ring of fire now smashed, and Iran limping and licking its wounds. This is all in the past 14 years alone. For most regions, that would cover maybe a century. But this is in only 14 years. We've seen all of this unfold in the Middle East. So my team and I kid, we say, man, there's never going to be a shortage of things to talk about when it comes to the Middle East and Israel. It's rapidly unfolding, and the prophetic time clock, in my view, folks, is only going into overdrive now. And a question to put out here to you before we really break this down. Here's a question. We've got a very active chat here. We've got, I say, the most educated audience on YouTube are watchmen and women on the wall. Here's a question we can get started with. Okay, the Sunni jihadis, backed by Turkey, again, Al-Qaeda, Muslim Brotherhood links, these are not nice guys, needless to say. They've now conquered a large area of Syria. Not all, but a large area of Syria. And by the way, there may be more internal fighting to come. Know that in Syria, and there very likely is. This is a wide range of so-called rebel groups, and you've got the Kurds up in the northeast as well, backed by the United States. There's a lot of players in Syria. But do they, the jihadis, do they say, okay, we've conquered Damascus, we've conquered the 4 largest cities in Syria. In the past 10 days alone, we've done it, lightning offensive, Aleppo, Hama, Homs, and Damascus. Do they say, okay, let's stand pat. Let's just consolidate what we have here in Syria. Let's at least present the veneer of being a moderate force and a legitimate government which can actually govern. Their ultimate goal, clearly stated many times, is to govern, quote unquote, Syria, if you can call it that, through radical Islamic Sharia law. But I digress. Do they say, let's consolidate, let's just focus on Syria, much like the Taliban's been doing in Afghanistan for the past few years, since Joe Biden handed them the keys in August 2021? Or do these jihadis in Syria say, you know what? We've got momentum right now, and the Iranian axis is back on its heels. We've got all the momentum. Hey, Lebanon looks vulnerable right next door to Syria, and we can finish off Hezbollah there in Lebanon. Iraq's always vulnerable next door to our east. It's unlikely. It's more likely that they consolidate power at home and just try and consolidate what they have in Syria and mop up there and exercise dominance over any other rebel groups there and emerge as the strong horse and the top dog. But in the Middle East, as I just laid out, in the past 14 years, you can expect the unexpected. Is it a crazy notion to say, wow, these guys feel like they have momentum and there's nothing in front of them to stop them? In 10 days, they drove to Damascus. Is it crazy to think maybe they drive across the border into Lebanon with a lightning strikes into Lebanon? Maybe they go east and invade into Iraq. There's a precedent here. ISIS, 2013, 2014. They roared out of Syria, did ISIS, and crossed the border into Iraq. And by the time they were done, they'd established a mini caliphate, which was the size of Great Britain. Or if you're looking at it from an American perspective, that's roughly the size of the state of Indiana. It covered 58,000 square miles. That was also a lightning offensive that swept across borders. You could conceivably see them sweep into Lebanon, where they'll have, I don't know what the resistance would be there. The Lebanese armed forces aren't exactly a powerhouse, folks, number one. And number two, Hezbollah has been smashed. They could conceivably sweep into Iraq. And they'd go toe-to-toe with the Iranian-backed Shia militias there in Iraq. But they didn't seem to put up much stiff resistance in helping Assad out. They pretty much gave up and retreated. or not only retreat, just didn't even go into Syria. This is, again, not outside the realm of possibility, any of this. And what about Iran itself? And we're going to break down more specifics of where Assad is and what's next and everything in a minute. What about Iran itself? We've been saying for weeks, man, the Iranian regime's vulnerable. Man, are they weakened? Wow. Now it's been laid bare. The Ring of Fire is dead. The Iranian Ring of Fire we talked so much about over the past few years. They surrounded Israel, which, helpful reminder, is the size of the state of New Jersey. They surrounded Israel on all sides. You had Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza. Gone, smashed. Hamas is a shell of itself. Islamic Jihad, do they still exist? I mean, they do, but man, have they been smashed. Hezbollah in Lebanon to Israel's north, smashed. Still formidable to a degree, but man, on their heels, licking their wounds, probably at 30% of their fighting capacity to what they were before Israel really went on that offensive on September 17th of this year with Operation Exploding Pager, as I call it. Now you look at Syria, which, if Hezbollah was the crown jewel of the groups, the actual proxies, Syria was the geographic crown jewel, not ground jewel, sorry. The geographic crown jewel, in that Syria it was too big to fail. At least it was before Iran and Hezbollah just weren't able to defend it anymore. And it was too big to fail in terms of Iran's broader regional strategy because it was the transit point. In order for Iran to get weapons into the hands of Hezbollah in Lebanon, they had to go through Syria on land. That meant shipments into Damascus International Airport, into Aleppo International Airport. There's a reason Israel bombed those two airports, by the way, over the past few years on a few occasions. That meant convoys coming from Iraq into Syria headed to Lebanon. Hezbollah was crucial to Iran's overall goal of destroying Israel. And a crucial component of that was to arm Hezbollah with the most advanced weapons. And the easiest way to do that for Iran, geographically, by land, was to use Syria. So when Assad was on the ropes, 2012, 2013, in the earlier days of the civil war in Syria, Iran went all in and Hezbollah went all in. They saved Assad, but even they were taking lumps. And they were on their heels to the point where 2015, Qasem Soleimani, remember him, the not so dearly departed Iranian terror master, he made 2 trips to Moscow, implored Vladimir Putin to help and get involved. Remember, the Assad regime and Russia have been cozy since the early 70s when Assad first came to power. His father came to power in Syria. So Russia threw its hat in the ring September 2015. Russian troops entered Syria. Russian airstrikes commenced. And that really turned the tide. Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, it appeared, had won the Syrian civil war for Bashar al-Assad, who was a lame duck, I should say. But now it's all out the window. Syria was too big to fail. But here's the problem from an Iranian perspective. Hezbollah failed. Again, Hezbollah begging for a ceasefire, begging for mercy, essentially. They're in bad shape. Iran itself exposed. Its ring of fire strategy unraveled. Its proxies, paper tigers at the end of the day, for all their bluster. And Iran itself, not only has its prestige and its reputation, its aura been damaged by Israel's heavy blows, which Iran provoked, by the way, and its proxies provoked. It's really like the book of Esther, Haman being hung on the gallows he meant for Mordecai. It truly is. More on that in the biblical prophetic perspective in a minute. But Iran's air defenses were eliminated on October 26th when Israel carried out airstrikes there. And missile factories, ballistic missile factories in Iran were also hit. Russia sidetracked in Ukraine. They just couldn't get involved in Syria this time around to save Assad. And not only that, if you're Iran, your ring of fire is done. Your transit point, Syria, to supply weapons to Hezbollah, that's gone now. Your air defenses have been eliminated, meaning you're completely vulnerable to Israeli airstrikes and any strikes against your nuclear facilities. Ayatollah Khamenei, your supreme leader, he's 85 years old and in bad health, reportedly. Oh, and by the way, Donald Trump takes office on January 20th, and he will resume the maximum pressure strategy on your regime, which means sanctions, economic hardship for you. Man, is Iran in a very bad place right now. Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, fortunes can be reversed, all that kind of thing. But the Iranian regime right now, it's kind of like if you flick them, they'll fall over. That's kind of the feeling right now. And their nuclear program, two things here to remember, folks. Number one, if you want it, it's there. If you're Israel, they don't even have air defenses right now. Donald Trump may just help you or at least give you tacit support when he gets in office in 43 days, 6 weeks away. New sheriff in town. And again, this is a disaster of Iran's own making. None of this would have happened if Iran didn't train and arm and fund Hamas, and then Hamas in turn carries out the October 7th massacre. It was a domino effect in the past 14 months, in only 14 months. And it's interesting, folks, because October 7th, 2023 was Hamas, and by extension, Iran and Hezbollah. That was their crowning achievement, their crowning glory. Hamas invaded Israel. 1,200 Israelis slaughtered, 238, I believe, dragged into captivity in the bowels of Gaza. I mean, this was their crowning achievement. Yet on that day, Hamas, and then the very next day, October 8th, 2023, when Hezbollah unilaterally, without provocation from Israel, began firing rockets, missiles, and drones at Israel, all of them signed their own death warrants. Little did they know when they were exulting at their crowning achievement, the October 7th massacre, little did they know they signed their own death warrants. Again, like Haman, let's go biblical, Book of Esther. Like Haman in ancient Iran, by the way, which was called Persia then. Haman and his family being hung on the very gallows he meant for Mordecai. Wow. God is a God of justice. He's got his hand on his land and his people, the people of Israel. He neither slumbers nor sleeps. And now Iran, the Iranian regime, is in a very bad way. We love the Iranian people, by the way, who are the main victims of that regime. And we'll see what happens in the days to come. Will the Iranian people say, enough is enough? They're weakened. They're confused now, the regime. This may be the time for us to rise up and finally just shake off this wicked yoke that's been on us for 45 years. It's a new day. And we want to talk, though, about, look, what happened in Syria. But again, these are not nice guys who've overrun Damascus. We need to talk about that, the ramifications for Israel, for America, for the free world, and really also for Sunni Arab. What about Jordan? You would think, I posed a question a few minutes ago, are these guys going to flood out of Syria and try to go into Lebanon, Iraq? You would think, if they know what's good for them, that they would not threaten Jordan or Israel. Israel, for obvious reasons, Israel will thump them. It'll be over in a day. But Jordan is very crucial to Israel's security. It's an ally of the West. So you think they would tread lightly when it comes to Jordan as well. But although Jordan is nervous right now, I can tell you that, as it looks to its north. Fascinating times. We want to break it down more. Before we do, if you like what you're hearing, if you like breaking news, current events out of the Middle East and Israel in particular, but we go global too. But for such a time as this, man, we gotta hit on what's happening in Syria and what it matters to you, why it matters to you, no matter where you live. Be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. And I can tell you right now that northern Israel is on high alert, in particular the Golan Heights. And our partner for today's live stream Our good friends at Magen David Adom are literally on those front lines right now. Magen David Adom is Israel's emergency services system. These are Israel's first responders. Folks, they respond to every terror attack in Israel. Everyone, Magen David Adom ambulances are there. Not only that, if someone has a heart attack, if there's a car accident, again, Magen David Adom are there. Tens of thousands of Israelis, a largely volunteer force. 95% are volunteers of their EMTs, leaving their families for nothing more than to do God's work. It's an amazing organization. Since October 7th, they've lost 30 of their volunteers killed in the line of duty, 17 ambulances destroyed or disabled by terrorists. And yet, whether it's northern Israel, where we've had tens of thousands of Israelis evacuated from their homes due to Hezbollah rocket barrages, or in the south around the Gaza border, again, evacuation, Magen David Adom is there putting their necks on the line. It's SaveLivesIsrael.com. SaveLivesIsrael.com. We talk a lot about how we can help. Erick, how can I help Israel? I get the comments all the time. In Israel's time of greatest need, can't think of a better way than to support Magen David Adom. Fulfill that biblical mandate laid out in the book of Genesis, chapter 12, verse 3, to bless the people of Israel. It's SaveLivesIsrael.com. By the way, Magen David Adom also controls Israel's blood supply, whether it's for civilians or the Israel Defense Forces. This is a great organization. You want to help Israel? Magen David Adom is it. I'm in Israel on a frequent basis. The Magen David Adom ambulances are everywhere. They're the first ones on the ground. This is the place. It's SaveLivesIsrael.com. And we pray that no Israeli lives need saving as a result of the revolution that just appears to have been completed in Syria. Here's what we know. A little bit more about the players involved. First things first, Israel, as I mentioned earlier, they've been striking in Damascus today. And the strikes have been, quote, very intensive with a focus on, I'm just reading straight off my phone here from the Times of Israel, dozens of Israeli Air Force aircraft struck numerous targets across Syria with a focus on destroying, quote, strategic weapons that could fall into the hands of elements hostile to Israel following the collapse of the Assad regime. The strikes have also targeted weapon production capabilities and air defense sites. So Israel is not taking any chances. And wisely. The main rebel force, of course, jihadi, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS for short, backed by Turkey. There's another Turkish jihadi group called the SNA, the Syrian National Army. But HTS, SNA, not to throw all these acronyms out at you, but these are Turkish-backed, Al-Qaeda, Muslim Brotherhood-linked jihadi groups. They're the main players here. And Mohammed al-Golani is the leader of HTS and pretty much the face of the insurgency right now. It's interesting because this was, again, HTS came out of Al-Qaeda. And al-Golani was a committed jihadist and said as much until recently, magically. Now he's saying, look, I've moderated and I want all Syrian factions to get along and I'm everyone's friend. So he's saying all the right things right now before the cameras. And rest assured that the mainstream media, led by the likes of the New York Times and CNN and the BBC, will rush to recast him as a moderate. I think, who was it? One of the mainstream media publications, when it eulogized Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, who Donald Trump had taken out. I have to laugh because if not, I'll cry. They eulogized him as, quote, an austere religious scholar. So that's what you're dealing with. So Mohammed al-Golani, the leader of HTS, is someone to keep an eye on. And we know the biggest loser is Iran and the Iranian axis and all of this in Syria. Russia is a loser here. I mean, Russia couldn't help Assad. They couldn't bail their man out. Yeah, they gave him asylum. He's in Moscow right now with his family. But they were so distracted by Ukraine, they didn't have the bandwidth. And Iran and Hezbollah didn't have the bandwidth, or in Hezbollah's case, the manpower or the capabilities anymore after they've been smashed by Israel. So biggest loser, the Iranian axis and Russia, no doubt. And this was made possible, as Bibi Netanyahu said today, as he talked about it, this was all made possible, the collapse of Bashar al-Assad, because of Israel. And by extension, because of October 7th. As I mentioned a minute ago, after October 7th, Israel went on the offensive, crushing Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, eventually crushing Hezbollah, or largely crushing Hezbollah. Hezbollah is still formidable, but it's a ghost of what it was. And that all led to the jihadi rebels being emboldened and Assad falling. Thank you, Israel. Thank you, Bibi Netanyahu. And the world should be thanking Israel for smashing the Iranian axis, a demonic association, a demonic alliance, an evil alliance. I don't say that lightly. Iran and these groups. So the world should be thanking Israel and Bibi, needless to say. But now the jihadis are ascendant in Syria, and that very much seems to benefit Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Now, it's interesting. He also supported ISIS and allowed fighters back in 2013, 2014, 2015, the height of ISIS. He allowed fighters who would come in droves from Europe, even the United States, to cross over the Turkish border right into Syria where they could join ISIS. And I said at the time that Erdogan's plan here, look, he fancies himself, he's an avowed enemy of Israel, as we know, but he fancies himself as a modern day caliph, meaning a modern day leader of the Islamic world. He'd like to see a revived caliphate, which is basically a United States of Islam in a very simplistic way. I'm saying that for the layman, but it's an Islamic state, the Islamic world united as one entity called the caliphate, under one ruler called the caliph. Erdogan longs to be that caliph. Remember, the last time we saw the caliphate, it was disbanded in 1924 after World War I. It was the Ottoman Caliphate, the Turkish-led Ottoman Empire. Erdogan has visions of the glory days of the Ottoman Empire returning once again. It's really dangerous, number one, because Turkey is still a NATO member nation, although under Erdogan's rule, you've heard me say it, they're more like NATO in name only. But the second largest military in NATO, behind the United States. That's first. But secondly, he's got this influence over these jihadi groups. And I said during the ISIS days, Erdogan's going to sit back. He's going to let ISIS seize all the territory. He's going to let ISIS do the dirty work. Let them basically seize a territorial caliphate. Then he'll roll in and rule over it. And could we be seeing that now, where he's employing, Erdogan, it's interesting. During the early days of the Arab Spring, the Islamist winter, as I call it, the Muslim Brotherhood was ascendant. Remember? Egypt, Tunisia, rumblings in Jordan. Erdogan was, and look, Erdogan is the Turkish version of the Muslim Brotherhood. His party is the Turkish version of the Brotherhood. So he saw his brothers in the Brotherhood ascendant. He said, this is great. The caliphate's forming. Then that was smashed, and the Brotherhood was weakened. Then ISIS. Erdogan said, okay, they're not my cup of tea in the way they go about things. We have a similar end game, but Erdogan's the more stealthy Brotherhood type, and ISIS is a overtly militarized jihadi group. But he said, you know what? Hey, they're getting the job done. They've seized 58,000 square miles in Iraq and Syria. We'll get behind them. Then we'll pick up the spoils at the end. And could he be saying that now in Syria? Okay, these jihadis, they're on a rampage. They're having great success. Let's back them. And then when they conquer the maximum area of geographically, and then we'll come on in there and we'll assume control. This is not outside the realm of possibility. Erdogan is an expansionist, folks. He's had Turkey involved in conflicts over the years, everywhere from Azerbaijan, Armenia to Libya. He's threatened Israel repeatedly. He's threatened Greece. He's in Syria. The Turks are in Syria right now. Even northern Iraq, there's been some incursion. Kurdistan, he hates the Kurds, obviously. So he is someone who is not shy about expansionism. And if Russia and Iran are no longer in Syria and Iran's weakened and Russia's like, you know what, we've had enough of the Middle East for now. We got to focus on Ukraine. Other than Israel, Turkey could have free reign, using these jihadis on the ground as his shock troops. This is just one more scenario, right? After what happened in the past 24 hours, the fall of Damascus and the Assad regime, it's all on the table, folks. No one can tell you where this is going to go. If they say they can, they're lying to you. No one except God Almighty knows where this is going to go. And now Donald Trump's coming into office on January 20th. And did you see him yesterday in France, by the way, with the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral? It was really interesting to me that many world leaders were there and they rose to their feet, shook Trump's hand. They know the sheriff is back in town, including Macron in France. So that's going to have all sorts of shockwaves in the Middle East and the world when Trump comes back to office. I say all that to say, you live in Bible times, prophetic times. And by the way, we talk about the prophetic as we close, and you'll hear this a lot in the days to come. Isaiah 17. The book of Isaiah chapter 17, verse 1 says that a day is coming when Damascus will cease to be a city. It will become a ruinous heap. That's straight from the word of God. Isaiah 17, verse 1. Now, Damascus, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the world's oldest inhabited cities. It's never been completely destroyed. And yet, even the Mongols didn't destroy Syria, or Damascus, I should say. And yet, the Bible is pretty clear that the day is coming when that is going to happen. Are you seeing birth pangs right now? Who knows where it's going? But man, oh man, fasten your seatbelts. And if you are a follower of Jesus, this is an exciting time to be alive. You're not fearful. You're not nervous. You know God's in control. You know he's on the throne. You know these wild events must happen. But you also know, again, God is in control and you can trust him and cling to him and follow him. And he will make your path straight. He will never leave you or forsake you. Some encouragement there as we close, because a lot of people see what's going on in the world right now and they say, wow, be encouraged. I think some good things are on the way in the years to come. We shall see. But until tomorrow, hey, keep it all in prayer. Keep following this closely. We're following it surely. We'll talk about it more tomorrow. Until then, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.